When you hear the word finance, what's the first thought that crosses your mind? If you're like 99% of people are entrepreneurs, the thought of having to look at or deal with your numbers brings fear or dread. Let's be honest, finance has never been a sexy topic. Most hate having to deal with or even talk about their numbers or finances because they're often viewed as scary, confusing, confronting, or just plain boring as batshit. Here's the thing. Finance doesn't have to be overwhelming or intimidating, and it can actually be quite a fun and stimulating topic because making money, becoming more successful, and creating more wealth is vital if you want to build a thriving and sustainable business and/or provide a strong financial foundation for your family. I created Financial Foreplay back in 2009 as a way to demystify finance, and I've been using my proprietary methodologies and strategies based on science to make complex financial concepts accessible to everyone. I want to give you the knowledge you need in order to become even more successful at growing your business or building real wealth for your family. And I'm also going to introduce you to some global experts so that you can learn from the best. And we're going to be speaking with some trailblazing individuals and entrepreneurs so you can really benefit from their stories, challenges, and triumphs. Financial Foreplay is a registered trademark, which is why there is only one Financial Foreplay, and you should only ever strive and settle for the best. It's time to slip into something a little bit more comfortable, because we're about to dive in and begin.
Can you keep my secret?
You might be surprised to hear that the term Mile High Club dates back to 1914. Apparently, a young aviator named Lawrence Burst Sperry invented the first prototype of the autopilot system. Basically, it made manual or hand-based flying redundant, and it kept aircraft really steady for long periods of time, freeing up the pilot to turn his or her attention to other matters in the cockpit. Now, hear me out, because this is where the story gets a little bit salacious. Just a couple of years later, Sperry made the news again when he and a female companion were rescued in the Atlantic Ocean after their small plane had crashed. When the rescue team arrived on the scene, Sperry and his female friend were completely naked, and they alleged that all of their clothes, including the really tricky bits like underwear, socks, and shoes, had mysteriously ripped off when the plane hit the water. And as you might imagine, the journalists had quite a lot of fun with the headlines that day. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that's a great story, but what does that have to do with our guest today? And my answer to your question is nothing, and yet everything. Elizabeth McCormick is a decorated U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter pilot. She flew missions like air assault repelling, command and control, VIP, and military intelligence. She also supported United Nations peacekeeping missions in Kosovo. She received the Meritorious Service Medal for her excellence in service, and she was awarded the Congressional Veterans Commendation. She not only shattered the glass ceiling in the military as a Black Hawk pilot, she went on to do it again in her corporate career as a global contract negotiator and now very, very well-known public speaker. She is a founding member of John Maxwell's team of speakers, coaches, and trainers, and she is also a #1 best-selling author of the PILOT, P-I-L-O-T method. Today, I've invited Elizabeth here to talk about world best practices for setting your organization up to work without you, i.e. on autopilot. She's a leading expert on leadership and team building, and I have a sneaking suspicion that the stories she is about to share with you are going to blow you away, and her advice is going to be invaluable to you today. Welcome, Elizabeth. I'm so excited to have you.
Hello. I'm happy to be here.
As a kid, did you always dream of being a pilot?
No, not at all. In fact, I went from being an artist and a jewelry designer to being a lawyer to being a mathematician. I really didn't have any one thing I wanted to be when I grew up. I ended up going to college on a volleyball scholarship with an art degree, a minor in mathematics, and an associate's degree in engineering because I decided to finally merge the math and art into architecture.
Wow. So how did you then back yourself into an amazing career becoming a Black Hawk pilot?
So my last year of college, I married my college sweetie, and he joined the military. And we were stationed at a really horrible base in the United States that was in the middle of swampland. And there were no jobs, none. I had 5 years of college, almost 3 college degrees, and the only job I got was working in a pizza place. And I was just miserable. I mean, I had painted myself into such a corner, both with being married and married young and just not having a job or a career. And I felt so unsatisfied with everything that I was doing. And I knew I had potential for something more than where I was at. You know what I mean? Like when you're not supposed to be doing what you're doing. Have you ever had that, Rhonda-Lynn?
Oh, look, absolutely. What happens on a regular basis, because we're always changing and growing, right?
Yeah, I was stuck. I was so stuck. And I finally
how'd you get unstuck?
Yeah, I looked at everything. I kind of had this like introspection and self-assessment of myself. And I'm like, okay, what am I willing to change? What am I willing to do? Right? Because it doesn't matter what you can do if you're not willing to do it. So I looked at it and said, what can I change? What am I willing to do? And decided that if he was in the Army, I could be in the Army. Why can't I? I decided to join the Army, and I wanted the coolest job possible. I had no idea what that was.
Why flying?
So because when I went onto the base and I researched it and I interviewed officers and, I interviewed everybody. I said, I asked them, what would you do if you had to do something different? And what would you do if you had to do it over? And finally, I always asked, what was the coolest job? And everyone said being a pilot was the coolest job. So I decided that was what I was going to do. I mean, I was 23 years old. I didn't know it was hard.
Was it the coolest job?
It was the coolest job. It was really hard. I had no idea they'd only let women into aviation about 13 years before that. The Army was only letting women in, one at a time and in small group, not even small groups, one at a time, just to see how it worked out, to make sure, because they didn't want us there. And they did everything they could to deter me along the way, from the first entrance into the recruiting station to do the paperwork, to the flight doctors looking at me and telling me, little girl, to the testing station where I had to take the testing, to all the way through. Everyone was against me doing this. Even my dad's like, what are you doing? My dad was an Army veteran, and he was not supportive. So, but I was set. I knew this is what I was supposed to do. And if you're, for those listening, you have a vision at some point. At some point you have the vision of the way something can be. And really your job is not to screw it up. Visions are a gift when we see the possibilities of what can happen. And I knew I was supposed to be a helicopter pilot, even though I didn't know how, even though I had to research every step of the way. And we didn't have Google back then, right? This was 1993. I had to figure it out and figure out the best way and the best strategy to make it happen for me, even when everyone else was against me.
What was the biggest hurdle that you encountered in your journey to become a Black Hawk pilot?
Let's see. Physically, the biggest hurdle was Warrant Officer Candidate School. I just finished 8 weeks of basic training, had to go straight into Warrant Officer Candidate School. And at that school, they had no female standards. Everything was one standard, an officer standard. And I had to meet the same standards physically as the men. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we're not built the same physically. So I had to meet all those same physical standards. And that means running 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles in boots, in gear at the same pace as the men. And that course, 6-week course, we started off with 7 women and only 2 of us finished. 5 were washed out because of the difficulty and the physicality of it. So that pushed me harder than I'd ever been pushed or even knew I had within me.
Wasn't it Ginger Rogers that said, I've got to do everything Fred does, but I've got to do it backwards and in high heels?
In this case, I was in combat boots, but yeah, same kind of guy. It was really tough. It was really tough. And I remember, I got the two of us that finished, by the way, we finished first and third in the class because it was either as a woman, it was either excel or get sent home. There was absolutely no middle in that. So,
and do you think that's a good thing?
They've since relaxed the standards and so they could allow more women in to succeed. So on the one hand, yes, that's a good thing we went from back then, less than 1% of all the pilots were women. So out of 200 to 250 pilots, one woman. Now it's about 6 to 8%, depending on the branch of service. So it's a lot. There's a lot more women, but still that's 100 pilots and only either 6 or 8 women, depending on the branch. And that's still not very many. So we still have a long ways to go. It's a very difficult, demanding job. So although I believe we still need the discipline, I can see that we don't necessarily need to have that difficulty in physicality.
Did you find that finishing at the top of your class like that changed the way that the male pilots looked at you and their respect for you?
So I earned their respect by, I think both Sherry, the other one, and I, we earned their respect by not giving up, because that was the biggest thing. If you, as we were running, not knowing when we would stop running, if you stopped and gave up, that was a strike, right? That was a reason for them to evaluate your performance and determine whether you get kicked out, booted out, or recycled into another class to try again in a better physical condition. So it was really kind of interesting. They actually voted me as they call it candidate staff. So there's 3 candidates out of the group, out of each class when you're the senior class, because it's 6 weeks long, 2 weeks each. And so there's always three classes running through. And when you're the senior class of the 3, you have 3 people chosen to run the program whenever the actual instructors weren't there. So you're candidate staff, candidate commander, candidate first sergeant, and a candidate XO. So they actually vote and choose who they want it to be. And I was selected to be the candidate XO. I remember them coming up to me, the cadre, the instructors. One came up to me and they're like, we have never had an honor graduate that's been candidate staff at the same time, because it's physically demanding, mentally demanding. You have to work an hour later than everybody else and get less sleep. And there's a lot. They purposely overload you, wanting you to fail. And I was like, okay, I don't know. I didn't know I was up for honor graduate. So it wasn't until they were like, you can't do this. It's never been done. And then I didn't find out until like 2 days before graduation, when we were in rehearsal, that I was based on my grades and peer evaluations, was named honor graduate. So
I was just about to ask you, what was your accomplishment that you're most proud of from your days in the Army, and how it's shaped the leader that you are today? Would you say that was it?
That was a big one. I mean, it was really, it was big, but yet when you're in it, you don't know what you don't know. And I'm a really big believer in that. You learn from putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, right? You find out who you're made of and what you stand up to. And I did an awful lot of that. Honestly, when I got to flight school, though, was when I was challenged harder, but that was mentally, it was a mental toughness challenge, because I drew a flight instructor who didn't believe women should fly and tried to fail me. So, and I dealt with about 7 weeks of verbal abuse every single day to fly. That, and finishing that and being able to finish flight school. And by the way, I don't tell you I was first in the class to brag. Because after the next phase, when I had the flight instructor who tried to fail me, I ended up being last in the class. So I went from being first to last. And if I have to compare the two accomplishments, finishing flight school, that phase of flight school last, I was a lot more proud of that because I felt like I really overcame something that could have held me back.
And how do you think that impacted what you did next? So you finished last in flight school, but you got through. How did you turn that into the stepping stone?
Everything you do before builds for who you are now. So I am more disciplined now as a business owner. When I worked in a corporate job as an international contract negotiator, I was more tenacious than the other person. And also really observant. So I would mirror body language, and I would, I remember one negotiation I had to do in France that the first year I just watched everything. And then the second year, when we went back to the negotiation table, I mirrored some of his body language and raising his voice at certain points when he had done it, when it was really important. And then I did it back at him a year later and he backed down. So it was, it's so interesting. Working with people and figuring out what makes them tick and what motivates them, and utilizing that knowledge to lead them better.
How do you determine what makes someone tick? What motivates them?
People make it easy if we're paying attention, right? Yeah. If we're paying attention. So I will, in a conversation, people will say, I see this, or they'll say, I heard this. And I know what kind of learner they are based on what they say on things like that. Are they talking about visual things? Are they talking about auditory things? Are they talking about, when I mountain biked up the hill and, then I know that they're kinesthetic. They want to be active. So people they will reveal themselves to you if you open them in conversation and listen.
What's the most interesting story that you have to share around negotiation?
Oh, it would be that France one. They were my biggest client. I mean, they were a multi-million dollar client that we purchased from. So I was given all the international contracts. So I had contracts in Japan and Sweden and England. But the one in France was the biggie. And the first time the first visit, I had to fly to France, and I had only been with the company 3 weeks. So I'm just figuring out how the company works and the contracts and working with the legal department on the contracts and things like that. And they didn't trust me to go by myself. So they flew an experienced person from Japan to go with me for this client. And the thing I learned really fast. So first of all, I didn't feel trusted, right? I mean, I'm new. Yeah, you just hired me, but you hired me because of my expertise and my skills. And then they sent a babysitter along, right? I'm like, really? Okay. So I show up. So on the way, they lost my luggage. So I had no clothing other than what was in my carry-on, which when you're going in to first impression and to meet a big, that's not what you want. So lesson learned, I never checked a bag on a negotiation trip after that. So I did that. The guy from Japan shows up. Now, Rhonda Lynn, I'm going to ask you, is the culture of Japan a little different than the United States, which is a little different from France?
Yeah, absolutely. I lived there for a year.
Yeah, right? So, and I got the international markets because I lived in Germany for 2.5 years when I was in the military and knew a smattering of this language and this language. So that's why they had given that to me. And, but I wasn't afraid to travel. I could handle it all by myself. But the culture is different. And Japan's they're really conservative in their negotiation. And
they're also very male dominated as well.
Well, but I was in manufacturing. Like we were manufacturing drilling and machining and mining equipment. So it was all male except for me. And the guy from France and the guy from Japan sitting next to me, the France is across the aisle. And I just observed body language, and like they spoke very good English. Everyone spoke English. The company's language was English, even though they're international. And so I'm asking questions and kind of, and then I'm watching, and so when something came up that he really, really needed it, he raised his voice and he slammed his hands on the table. And, and I kind of, made a mental note of that and to observe that. And then we didn't do super well in that negotiation, because every time I pushed on something, the Japan guy would defer, and he'd be demur, and he'd be, well, we could, I'm like looking at him going, shut up. Right. But I wasn't in charge. So he was sent to handle me and handle it. So I wasn't very happy with the results. And then a year later, that from France, it was just my contact in France we alternated which country we went to every trip. And so it was time for the new contract, and he came to the United States. And I'll never forget that I remembered that body language, that he slammed his hands on the table and he raised his voice when he really needed something. And there was one thing my boss really wanted me to make sure we did not give on. So when it came to that point, beforehand, I had all this planned out. I slammed my hands really loudly on the desk and I raised my voice. Well, and he backed down on that point. So because it was the same kind of thing he had done. And but outside the conference room where we were meeting were all of my coworkers. I never raised my voice. I never slammed the desk. It was not me, right? And so after, like, I see them in the window. They're all like looking in the window. What did they do to make Elizabeth mad? They're all trying to figure it out. I thought it was that story and that, but I was able to get what I wanted. So I think the biggest lesson, and it's huge in negotiation, it's also huge in business and everything we do, is paying attention to the other person and what they do and what they don't do and what they talk about, and stop thinking about what you're going to say next, right? Because that's what we do, right? We think about, I'm going to say this next and I'm going to do this. And we really aren't paying attention to the other person, and they will reveal themselves to you when you're paying attention.
Look, that's a great point. One of the things that you touched on that I want to come back and talk about a little bit in more depth, because I kind of get the feeling there's a lot under the surface that you can share more, is this whole notion of there needing to be trust in order to have a successful negotiation. What can you share on that?
Oh, so, one of the biggest mistakes that I see leaders making is that they don't put trust in their people. And I was new, three weeks with the company. Like to them, my passport ink was barely dry, but they hired me because I had years of experience in different corporate companies negotiating. So they didn't trust me. And when you don't feel trusted, right? When an individual, it doesn't feel trusted, it makes them question their own skills. It makes them question their own confidence and abilities in those situations. And I think, yes, trust has to be earned.
Do you think it might have led to a different result, though? Do you think that the result would have changed if you went into that negotiation in France and the guy from Japan wasn't there?
Oh, yeah. It would have been better, because the other guy was coming behind me after me, giving different answers and kind of, oh, well, no, what, and kind of soft shoeing me and my answers there. So I think we have to trust people until they mess up, instead of questioning and being distrustful and making them earn it, especially in business, especially you're just talking about a resume and experience and other things. Until they give you a reason to distrust them, we have to have some faith in business.
Do you see this
Trust our own
playing out
judgment.
with a lot of the other businesses that you consult for or that you might do coaching for now? Do you see this same sort of dynamic playing out over and over again?
Yeah, I see it more often than I would like. You know, but I also see that they've been burned, right? So at some point, somebody has done something that has caused them not to be trustful. So, well, look at our society. I'll make fun of the U.S. society. How's that, Rondalyn? So we've got one terrorist is caught with explosive substance in their shoe. What did we do? Now everyone has to take off their shoes in every airport to get through security, right? And now,
Yeah.
unless they're really old or really young. But I mean, we create systems, we create policies based on exceptions that have occurred and one-offs and unusual circumstances instead of using more common sense and more, we and more trust. And that's done in the name of security, of course. But I still think, did we really necessitate every single person taking off their shoes for the next, how many years has it been? Right? Is that not
more than 10?
You're right. So it's been a long time. So, I think, especially when it comes to businesses, we tend to kind of knee-jerk response instead of really thinking through the outcomes and really thinking through, every step of the way. And that's one thing with my training as a helicopter pilot is if this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens and kind of taking it all the way down the road and then flipping it around. What is my employee experience? What is my consumer or customer experience from that? And I think that really that 30,000 foot view of strategy is missing. We're not thinking through the experience for the user and the software level and the consumer that's buying it and the employee that's administering it and the customer service agent that has to talk about it. And I think when we look at things in a more holistic way, we end up with a better product or result.
Yeah, look, that's so very true. If you had to give people who are listening right now kind of your top 3 tips for the things that you've really learned that make a difference to having an organization that runs without them, but that also has strong leadership and that builds trust, what would you give as your top tips?
I think it really comes down to people. And there's 3 things that you can do that will help them is make cross-training skills and departmental skills. So whether you put people on rotations or whatever, but cross-training your people is key to them having a better understanding of the holistic approach of your entire organization. So creating a cross-training system. And then with that, succession planning, right? Knowing when this person's on vacation, this person's in charge. But that also leads to also not just succession planning, but also promotion planning, right? Of who's being developed as a leader. And that's where the cross training ties into that, right? If they show aptitudes and skills, then, and they feel trusted because you're training them, in someone else's job. They feel that. And then the third piece is empowering your people. Let them have a say in your organization. Let them, bring ideas to the table, even if they've been suggested before and you tried it and it didn't work, still let them suggest it. Don't shut them down right away. Let people feel heard and empowered to raise a hand when something isn't right. It's amazing how many employees after a major catastrophe, right? They go, "Oh yeah, I thought that was a bad idea." But they never said anything because they were afraid. They were afraid of sounding stupid. They were afraid of going against the management. They were afraid of being embarrassed. There wasn't a culture of empowerment where it's okay if know the only idea that's not that's not brought up, that's the idea. When it's not brought up, that's the dumb idea, right? Not the one that you say. And so creating that culture within your workplace of where people feel like they're heard and empowered. If an organization that does those three things, I mean, you're developing the people side of the business that shows up everywhere.
Yeah, well, your people are your business. They're your most valuable asset. And if they don't see a future for themselves that's beyond the skills that they have now, they're not likely to stay, are they?
Nope. And you know what's worse is when you don't invest in them and you don't empower them and they do stay.
Correct. No, so true. Well,
It is. It can hurt the organization. No one wants to eat the soup after somebody spits in it. That's bad. Don't do that. Right? It doesn't take much to sour a culture of an organization.
Exactly. Well, look, I have benefited so much. I've made copious amounts of notes as we've been talking, and I really wanted to say thank you for stopping by. Look, your experience, just what you've accomplished in your careers, multiple careers, is nothing short of absolutely phenomenal and so inspiring. And I really liked what you said about not giving up. I mean, I think that you've demonstrated that, in everything that you've done and in every way that you've done it. And I just want to say thank you for your time and sharing this, and also just give you an opportunity to let folks know, how can they get in touch with you? How can they learn more about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm really easy to find on everything. You can search Black Hawk Pilot Speaker and find me no matter where. Pilot Speaker is my handle on everything social. And but what I really want to say is that right now our people are hurting, right? They're hurting because we need more motivation, and a lot of us are working from home, or we're essential workers out there working and feeling unappreciated. And to help that, what I did is I have an online course called Master Your Motivation that I did that is for at the user level. They can watch it at home or work or wherever. And it gives tips and tricks and there's 3 strategies to boost your confidence so that you can show up more empowered on an internal, right? Because it's not just an outside job, it's an internal job to be motivated and to be confident in what you do. So it has 3 confidence boosters. It has 30 ways to be more motivated today that are all fast and easy and don't cost money. So I've got all this kind of compiled into an online course about motivation that I am giving to you for listening. And the price is over road to free.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is so generous. I can't wait for people to check it out, and I'll definitely be sharing any feedback that anyone has with me to you. So thank you again so much. I doubt this will be the first and the only time that we speak. I think there'll be many more opportunities for us to have you back on the show and to talk through some of this stuff.
Excellent. I love the autopilot story, but I'm still wondering, if we're using autopilot naked, what got in the way?
Yeah, look,
something got in the way. We'll leave that to your imagination.
There are things I want to say, but there's no beep.
We'll just leave it to their imagination to imagine what could have gotten in the way. No autopilot in a helicopter. You have to be on the controls.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll make a note to myself never to attempt something like that.